Hey there, in this video we're going to look at making figures where we have multiple graphs. And by multiple graphs, I mean multiple axes that we're drawing lines on. You've already seen how to draw more than one line on a single graph, but here I want to make multiple graphs in a single figure. The easiest way to do this is to stack your figures vertically, and you're technically making individual figures, individual images, and you're just drawing them one after the other. We can do that by just calling plot.figure multiple times. We've seen plot.figure in the context of changing the size. If we call it with no arguments at all, it just makes a figure. That's its job. So if we call plot.figure and then we plot some data, I need to make some data here to plot. So let me just do that real quick. We'll go with linspace, let's say -10 to 10, and we'll do 200 of those. And then for y, we'll do, what would be good? Do some kind of polynomial thing. So we'll do like x squared minus 2 times x cubed. Okay, so there's some, call that out of NumPy. There's some data for us to be plotting. So I can call figure and then plot x versus y. Plot.show, this is our usual just make a single graph command. But if we call figure another time before calling show, this will make a new figure, and then I can plot something different. Let's plot, say, x versus x to get a straight line. So you see what happened here is it gave us 2 different plots, and I'm not sure how well you can see in the video, but if I drag it away in my web browser here, it's 2 images. There's an image for that and an image for that. And it looks like I accidentally dragged it into a cell. Not what I want. So that's your easiest way to have multiple graphs drawn at the same time. But let's say I want these to be side by side. I want them to be part of the same image if I save that image. In that case, I want to use one of the subplotting features in Matplotlib. And there's at least 3 different ways to draw subplots. 3 ways I'll show you here in this video. So first of all, let's go with the simplest to use, but also the least powerful of them. Is we're going to call plot.subplot, and now we have to give it a code. So if we look in here, it says args up here, but if we look down farther here, number of rows, number of columns, index. And so index is going to be an integer, it's a counter, and it's going to read from left to right, top to bottom. So let's say I wanted to make a 2 by 2 grid. I'd have 2 rows, 2 columns, and the first thing in the grid would be 1, not 0 indexed. And then I can make that plot, and then let's do another plot.subplot. Let's say I wanted 2 rows, 2 columns, and we'll put the other one at position 4. It'll be like bottom right corner. See what that looks like. So here's our subplots. So this would be position 1, 2, 3. Here's position 4. I left 2 and 3 empty. Kind of silly looking. More typically, you would draw this like I want 1 row with 2 columns, 1 row with 2 columns, with position 1 and position 2. And then draw them side by side. You can see the overall size of the total figure is still the original. I think it's 6 by 4. So typically, if we're going to do this to look good, we want to make our figure bigger. We want to start with a call to figure with fig size equal, say, 12 by 4. It would give you twice the original width. That looks a bit bigger. And then we can do titles and whatnot. Now we have to be a little bit careful here. Depending on what we've called will change where we are. So for example, if right here after making the first one, I call plot.title first, that title goes with the first subplot. Comment out that line. If I do it after I make the second plot, that will be the title for the second one. And if we have both of these, we'll get 1 title for the first plot, 1 title for the second plot. So we're kind of running these commands in order. Right now we're basically saying the first subplot is active. That's what this command does. The first one is active. Anything I do appears over here. It could be multiple plots, formatting, changing the x limits, y limits, giving titles. And now here I say make the second subplot active. Now any command I run shows up in the second subplot. There is a way to give the whole thing a title. You can call this command, actually call this command anywhere. But we'll say, let's do this at the end. Super title We'll call it the figure. And so that appears kind of like above everything else. Okay, so that's the first way we could do it, is using our subplot commands. So the second one is going to be using subplots with an S. And it is kind of annoying that they gave the names, these two names, so similar. This one's a little bit different. So subplot without an S is what we just looked at. Here's subplots with an S, number of rows, number of columns. That actually sounds really familiar, but it doesn't have an index anymore. Instead, we have to scroll way down here to find this. Oh, right here. So it's going to return a tuple of values. It's going to give me a figure. It's going to return the figure itself. And there are times when you want access to the figure itself. And it's going to return an array of axes objects. One object if there's just one thing in the plot, or multiple if there's multiples. So let's try that out. To make something just like we saw here, we'd have subplots, 1 row, 2 columns. And I want to, let's see what happens when I call it by itself. So if I call it just by itself, this is what gets spit out of it. It's a figure object and an array with 2 subplot type objects in it, 2 axes. These are called generically, these square things here are called axes. It also tries its best to draw it, but there's nothing to draw. So what I really want to do here is fig axes equals plot.subplots. And just so we have more control here, let's add a plot.show. And now my axes, like what is that? Well, let's print my axes. So my axes here are these 2 things. So how do we get control? We've got a couple options. If we want to use the same kind of style as last time, where we are running commands in order, we want to do a set current axis. So that's SCA, or set the current axis. So we'll set current axis to first one, axis 0, because axis had 2 things in it. Now I can run commands like plot title first. Then we can set current axes to axis 1. And then we can do our second set of plot commands. And we could add a super title if we wanted. I'll just leave that off for now. So if we run this code, oops, mad about, oh, I ended up with an extra set of square brackets in here. Just a typo there. So we'll get the same kind of behavior as before. Difference is I never scaled it up, so we might want to do, well, let's use fig right now. So I have access to my figure object. And it should have, doesn't want to show me what's in there. Figure, okay, attributes. Fig size. Okay, so I should be able to set, I don't know why it won't tab complete, but I should be able to set my fig size. Oh, it doesn't like that. Probably something like set fig size or set size. All right, anyway, here we are exploring, trying to figure out what's attached to our object. So I don't know why the tab isn't working. Oh, there it is. Just took it a long time. All right, anyway, this is our fig object, and it has a bunch of methods attached to it. And there's got to be one to change the size of it. So I'm thinking it's called set something. Set, we got set fig height, set fig width. Okay, well, we'll just change the fig width. Set fig width to 12. Left off my parenthesis. There we go. So what we're doing right here is using matplotlib in a different sort of way. We're using the object-oriented version of controlling matplotlib, where everything is an object and we can change it by calling methods on it. I personally am not as fond of that. A lot of people love it. So I'll link to the documentation for how you can change things by calling their methods. But mostly I'm just going to show you how to go through it procedurally. That is, you just call command, call command, call command, because that's my personal bias. And I'm making the video, so I get to pick. So this is the second way to create subplots. There is a third way to create subplots with, again, a very similar name. And this one is called subplot to grid. So if we look at subplot to grid, we get a shape. This is going to be a tuple for the size of our grid. We're going to get a location in the grid, a second tuple, so listing where you want to be in the grid. And then we have row span and column span, which is really cool because this will control if I want a figure that's like especially wide. For example, like if I made a 4x4 grid, I could make one really wide. To make the same figure we've been playing with, I want to have one row with 2 columns, and I want to put my first figure at position 1, 1. And then let's copy my plot making code. Okay, so this would make the first figure for us. We'll call subplot to grid. 1 row, 2 columns, and at position 1, 1, I want to draw the first figure. Then my second call here of subplot to grid would be in place of the subplot call. 1 row, 2 columns at position 1, 2. We also want to make our figure nice and wide. We'll do it just like we did in the original. So up here in the original, we did a fig size. And we could do that here, actually, in every single column. We could do fig size. I just wanted to show you the different way to adjust figure. But we'll do fig with fig size set. And what's it mad about? Oh, I wonder if these are 0 indexed. Yeah, okay, so that's what happened. Mistake on my part. These are 0 indexed here. So you have a lot more control than you do in the first form. It's a little bit more confusing because you're 1 indexed when you're describing the size of the grid and you're 0 indexed when you're indexing into the grid. But you get those cool things like the row span and the column span will let you easily make figures that are especially wide or especially tall. And while that is possible using subplots, it's a little bit trickier, and you can easily end up with things like labels overlapping each other. You got a little bit more control here with the subplot to grid form. In any case, I've shown you 3 different ways that we can draw our graphs side by side in this video. The end result is going to be visually identical no matter what approach you take. So what I recommend is play around with each of the 3 and see which one you feel most comfortable with, which style you like the most. Make sure you check out the object-oriented style from Matplotlib because, like I said, some people really love that style and it really clicks with them. Other people like me, prefer the procedural command sort of style for making your graphs.